Hi. Hello, welcome to Knock Knock Hi with the Glaucomfleckens. I am Will Flannery, also known as Dr. Glaucomflecken.
I am Kristen Flannery, also known as Lady Glaucomflecken.
Lady, I am fired up.
You sure are.
I'm fired up.
This is a topic that really gets you going.
We are. It's all about private equity today.
Yes.
Hope you're ready. So we talked
Buckle up.
What's that?
I said buckle up.
Buckle up. 1,000 miles a minute. Here we go. We're talking to the author of a fantastic book that I found out about on social media.
You could not get your hands on it fast enough.
I ordered it immediately. As soon as I saw it and read the description, I was like, I got to do it. And
Which you do not order many books, so that is high praise.
Yes. It's called Bad Company, Private Equity, and the Death of the American Dream. If you're already not a fan of private equity, you're going to love this book. If you're not sure what you think about private equity, you're going to love this book. If you have
don't
no
know
idea
what private equity is,
what I'm even talking about, you will love this book. Honestly, I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed it. And so I messaged the author. I was like, please come on the podcast. And she was gracious enough to, in the middle of her book tour.
Yeah.
Join us for about an hour of wonderful conversation.
Yep. And if you are not super into private equity, you might think this is a boring book, but au contraire.
No. It's very human experience, and
narrative driven,
and also some wins against private equity. So, or people laughing in the face of private equity.
That's right.
It's great.
It does leave you on a hopeful note, even though there's a lot of yucky stuff going on.
This book was made for me.
It really
personally. Dr. Glaucomflecken, this book is for you.
Yeah, that should have been the subtitle.
Hopefully, I think it's going to be for you too. So let's get to it, shall we?
All right.
Here is Megan Greenwell.
What you doing there, buddy?
I'm so glad you asked.
Oh.
I'm being a Demodex.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, that's what they sound like.
Those little mites?
If you put a microphone in front of them, I'm sure they would probably, most likely, maybe sound like that.
You think so?
I don't really know.
Oh, well, let's see how much you do really know.
Oh, you're going to quiz me?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
What are the only two main species of Demodex mites found in humans?
Type 1 and type 2.
Close. Demodex folliculorum, which are found in the eyelash follicles, and Demodex brevis, which are found in the meibomian glands.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay, next one. Next question.
Okay. Why do people with Demodex blepharitis often feel itchy eyelids first thing in the morning?
I know this, and because they avoid light and come out at night to mate.
Oh.
Yeah, they're mating on your eyelids while you're sleeping.
Super.
How does that make you feel?
So gross.
And so people wake up with that itchy, irritated feeling because they've been moving around in the eyelash follicles all night.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
I'm surprised you even brought that up.
I know. I'm just trying to get used to these mites since Demodex blepharitis is such a common disease and we keep talking about them.
And that's a big step. Thank
you.
There's a prescription eye drop, though, that's available for Demodex blepharitis. Did you know that? To learn more about these mites and Demodex blepharitis, visit miteslovelids.com for more info. Again, that's miteslovelids.com to learn more. This ad is brought to you by Tarsus Pharmaceuticals. Kristen, I got to tell you about a new podcast that every clinician should know about.
Ooh, tell me.
This is the Sepsis Spectrum.
Okay.
It's by the Sepsis Alliance and critical care educator Nicole Kupchik. This is really important. Each episode is about confronting blind spots in sepsis and antimicrobial resistance education. A lot of this stuff usually doesn't make it into textbooks or compliance training.
That's weird because it's super important.
Yeah, everybody needs to know about this stuff. You can listen to the Sepsis Spectrum wherever you get your podcast or watch it on the Sepsis Alliance's YouTube channel. To learn about how you can earn free nursing CE credits just by listening, visit sepsispodcast.org. All right, we are here with Megan Greenwell. Megan, thank you so much. Author of Bad Company, Private Equity, and the Death of the American Dream. Very uplifting title, by the way.
Yes, thank you. I really strive for inspirational,
I think it's great, though, because it tells you exactly what you're getting into, right? I mean, that's probably the point. And when you come up with a title for a book, is it what's the process there?
Oh my God. The title for this book was so difficult. There was a title on the proposal, which I never liked. And then we just went through so many terrible titles. And we almost landed on one that I also really hated.
Uh-oh.
And then at the very last minute, my editor was like, "What about Bad Company?" And I was like, "Yes, please lock it in now."
Oh, it's perfect. And you're going to get people who just happen to be fans of the 1970s, rock band.
Yes, exactly. Who embarrassingly I had never heard of until I started writing this book. But now I feel so familiar because everybody brings them up to me all the time.
I'm sure they do.
Which is great.
So let's start with just the impetus for this book. And you talked about it in your intro, of you worked for Deadspin, R.I.P. Deadspin, actually in its current form, right? Does the website still exist?
Yes, it exists as an outlet of a Maltese offshore gambling company.
Oh.
Which feels like a fitting end, right? We can't just let things die with dignity. We have to
right.
Yeah.
That's the private equity. That's the perfect descent into private equity. Is you end up with a gambling company. I like what you said about the traffic that it gets now is about equal to, I forgot what the
greenfieldpuppies.com.
That's right.
Based in West Virginia, I think. Yeah.
But I remember, I read Deadspin. I loved the snark and the sports, and it was a fun website. And it's as many of these things do. You get introduced to certain parts of the the U.S. and things underneath the surface, like private equity. Once it starts to affect you, and you just now you're all of a sudden, oh, what is this? This is a thing that's affecting my life now.
Yeah, absolutely. I have covered so many things in my journalism career, and I had never covered business. So I could not have told you anything specific about what private equity is or how it operates. And then it swallowed my life. Deadspin was really my dream job. I was the editor-in-chief there, and once I got there, I was sort of like, "Great, I have it made. I'm not leaving." And it all fell apart within about a year and a half after a private equity firm bought the company. And, what was weird was Deadspin was successful. We were profitable. We had a huge audience, very, very loyal audience.
Yeah.
And so they came in and they were sort of like, "Okay, we'll just monetize you better." And we were like, "Great. Honestly, that sounds perfect," because nobody had really paid attention to, should we develop a subscription model, whatever it was. And instead, they were just like, "No, you can't cover any of these things you cover. We just wanna, make you into, a generic sports score generator kind of thing." And we were like, "Right, but that's not what the audience is coming for."
Right.
So, what? It just really didn't make any sense.
They're trying to turn you into something they thought would be profitable, but was totally just dissociated from what had gotten you there in the first place.
Yes, I think their only model of success was scale, and so they wanted us to
Right.
be ESPN. But even that was, very confusing because I would say things like, part of the reason ESPN is so big is because they have exclusive rights to broadcast professional sporting events. Do you want Deadspin to be competing for NBA rights?
Yeah.
And you could see this look pass over their face like they had never considered that that was a key difference before.
Yeah.
And I was sort of like, it's not just that you're trying to kill this thing that I love and that I really believe is good. It's also that you're doing it in such a ham-handed, stupid way. What are we even doing here?
Yeah.
So let's talk about exactly what is private equity, because I think starting there is important, because that the term gets thrown around a lot. You hear it a
Yes.
lot, private equity, but I would venture to guess a lot of people don't really know what that means. What is this money? Where is it coming from?
Yeah, totally. So I really wrote this book for people who are the person I was 3 years ago, where I sort of knew that private equity was big and influential and had no idea of what that meant. So if that is you, please come. You're one of us. Um, Basically, the way private equity works, private equity does many different kinds of things, but when people are talking about private equity, they're generally talking about leveraged buyouts, and that's what I focus on in the book. And what that means is a private equity firm pools money from university endowments, public pensions, ultra wealthy individuals, investment firms, and then combines that money with massive bank loans. So about 70 to 80% of any given private equity deal is made up of loans, and they use that money to acquire companies outright. So that's a key distinction from like venture capital, where you're investing in a business. Here, the private equity firm is actually owning it entirely. The trick is that those bank loans, which again are a huge majority of the deal, the debt is assigned not to the firm, but to the company they are acquiring. So if I want to buy your podcast, I'm going to take out a huge loan to do it and then say, I'm not legally responsible for that debt, only you are. So you end up with this split in incentives where what's good for me as the private equity baron is not necessarily what's good for my own portfolio company that I am legally responsible for. And that was the thing that when I learned it, I was sort of like, wait, what? How does this system exist? I need to learn more about this. And that's what got me really obsessed.
That was my response also. It didn't compute. Like how, a company sells itself, but then is in debt, like.
Yeah, I guess that's the question. Like how do they transfer that debt? Because when they take out the bank loans, presumably like in
the private equity firm's name?
No, they take the debt out in the company's name.
Do they own the company?
By that point, when they take out the loan?
So they own the company, but there is a way of dividing it such that the private equity fund owns the company, not the firm itself. But a fund isn't responsible for debt. And so technically, like I write a lot about Toys R Us in the book. Yeah. That was a $6 billion deal and $5 billion of it was loans. Those were two of the richest private equity firms on earth, but they took the loans out only in Toys R Us's name. So even though they were the people calling all the shots, they didn't have any responsibility for the debt.
The debt had to be serviced by the company.
Why do the companies agree to this? That sounds awful for the company. Like, what's the selling point?
So companies often end up in private equity ownership when they don't have a lot of other options. They tend to target industries where businesses are struggling for one reason or another. Crucially, struggling does not mean on death's door, and I think that is an important distinction to make. But it does mean that they're having some sort of problems. And so if you're the board of a company and you're in some sort of financial difficulty and somebody comes to you and says, we'll pay you X billion dollars, you actually have a legal fiduciary responsibility to accept that offer, even if it's not what's in the best interest of the company long term. And private equity is very specifically a short-term game. Yeah. That's why a lot of the problems arise. They're not really trying to do the long, slow, hard work of improving the fundamentals of a business.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, a board in a lot of cases just has to say yes if the money is there.
That's insane.
So I found myself saying that a lot as I read through your book. Yeah. That's insane. That could have been the tagline of your book. This is insane.
Would have been a good one.
So putting this in the healthcare context, because we have a lot of people that listen to this podcast, probably most people who are in or adjacent to the healthcare system. So in my content, like I have two enormous soapboxes. Like they're so tall. Like it's hard for me. I'm tall, and it's even hard for me to climb up on my soapbox. And one of them is health insurance companies.
Yeah.
Yep.
And United Healthcare in particular, they're the easiest punching bag. And whenever I post content about that company or health insurance in general, it's just everyone just loves it. They agree. They're like, yes, down with United Healthcare type of thing. It's so interesting because whenever my other soapbox is private equity in healthcare, when I post about that, I get like, oh yeah, that's pretty bad. But it's not anywhere near the reaction. But reading your book and seeing how pervasive private equity is just in every industry in our country, it almost seems like people should be more upset and interested in private equity versus, I mean, they're both bad,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like
yeah.
I feel like it's not a proportional type of anger that there should be. And why do you think that is? Why do you
Oh, I mean, I
think?
can tell you exactly why this is.
Ooh.
The reason is because if you have to deal with a health insurance company, which we all do,
Yeah.
you see exactly the ways in which they're bad and exactly the ways in which their badness is screwing you over. Private equity firms have a real interest in remaining as secretive and as, beneath the surface as possible,
Mm,
and they are very good at it. And so even if you think your local hospital, for example, is providing much worse care and is stripping services and is raising prices and all of these things that private equity owned hospitals do, most of the time, you don't actually know that that hospital is owned by private equity. The private equity stakeholder project has a good tool for hospitals specifically where you can go in and look up like
oh, really?
every private equity owned hospital in your state. And I really encourage people to do that.
What is that? Hold on. So,
The private
I've never
equity
heard of that.
stakeholder project, they have
Oh,
what they
okay.
call the hospital tracker,
Oh,
Ah.
which is a great resource open to anybody. Very much encourage it. But that's just hospitals, right?
right.
If your local, private practice doctor's clinic is owned by private equity, it is so difficult to figure that out, right?
Mhm.
Because there are thousands of them all over the country, and nobody, even the most committed activists on earth cannot do a tracker effectively that tracks every single doctor's office that's owned by private equity. And so
Yeah.
I would bet that the vast majority of patients who are seen at a clinic, office, whatever, owned by private equity have zero idea. And that is 1000% by design. That is what the
Yeah.
private equity firms want. And so it does not surprise me that there is less reaction because I think people just don't know. And
Yeah.
even the problems that they know are affecting them in our healthcare system, the ones that are attributable to private equity, they just haven't seen yet.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen comments, it's like, "How do we know?" Like, people are
Yeah.
wondering, like, "How do we know?" Like, and you're right, they don't. They're purposefully trying to obfuscate that information, right? And keep people in the dark as far as how they
Yes.
operate.
And it
It
was hard for me in a lot of cases too. I mean, so the first tip I always give people is like, if it's, let's say it's a private practice doctor's office, go down to the very, very bottom of the page, like the fine print, and see if it says it's part of a company. Then Google that company and see who their owners are. You can go deeper, like you can look up SEC filings for various types of companies. Um, I'm a journalist, so, like, looking up SEC filings is, like, very fun and exciting to me. I don't expect most people to do that in their normal life,
Yeah.
but if you do get really obsessed with it, like, you can go pretty deep. But, yes, they will go to great lengths to conceal what they own from
Mm.
all of us.
Well, you did something very, I think, really smart in this book, by focusing on the individual. Um, because that's who, ultimately, it seems private equity ends up affecting the most negatively
Yeah.
is the individual, the person, the worker. And so, in particular, obviously, I'm interested in this, Riverton, uh, hospital in Wyoming, and just following the step by step how it happened, how this hospital went from, nonprofit to for profit to a third option, which, really we should be thinking of hospitals in terms of, I think, three different. Right now it's like all either nonprofit or for profit hospitals.
Mhm.
I think there should be a third category that's maximizing shareholder value hospital.
Mhm.
Like, because it does, and you make this point very clear. Like, there is a difference
Yeah.
between running things for profit and which would be just your average, a hospital that's not a nonprofit, right? That is able to give money to their shareholders versus the private equity form of it.
Yes. Absolutely. I am, like, inherently a little queasy about the idea of for-profit hospitals,
Yeah.
Sure.
just because it feels creepy to me for people to be profiting off of that at all. But it is absolutely true that for-profit does not necessarily mean quite as rapacious as private equity owned. And in fact, this hospital in Riverton, Wyoming ran successfully as a for-profit hospital, and people were pretty happy with it. It got great patient care ratings. The doctors were happy for years, It was doing fine under that ownership structure. And then private equity came in and they were just like, well, this can't stand. We have to strip all the services.
So so you have this, because their ultimate goal is maximizing shareholder value.
Yes.
Well, so for those of us who are less educated on this topic, what is the difference then between the for-profit? Because you said that was also about shareholder value. So what's the difference there?
So there are all sorts of different types of for-profit situations. For-profit can mean public companies. It can mean like a family business, right? It can mean all sorts of things. It's not that they're fundamentally different. It's that private equity is the most greedy form of a for-profit ownership structure. And so, yes, all for-profit companies to some extent are trying to maximize shareholder value, but private equity just sort of turns that up to 11.
Yeah.
And so in hospitals, for example, like most for-profit hospitals still seem to feel some obligation to like provide basic medical care. And a lot of private equity owned hospitals just do not. So this hospital in Riverton, Wyoming stripped services to the point that you couldn't have a baby or like get your appendix out, like basic hospital things. Because it just wasn't cost effective enough for them. And even at most for-profit hospitals, you can still have a baby there.
Yeah.
I think the obligation to the community is a really important point.
Yeah.
Because like I'm in private practice. We're a physician-owned practice.
Yeah.
And so we are for profit, but we make decisions not just based on like what's going to make us the most money. It's also, okay, what's good for our patients? Like what's good? What are the needs of the community?
Yeah.
And how can we balance that with our need to, pay our bills and
Right.
and
Financial needs of
the
the
financial
company.
needs of the company,
Right.
versus a maximizing
Yeah.
shareholder value model where someone in a private equity firm in New York is not seeing the community. They've never, right, Megan? They've never even been.
Yeah, exactly. They've
to
never
the
set
community.
foot there. Yeah.
No, these guys, they're not going to Wyoming
No.
to check it out.
No.
So
and they own too many hospitals to do
Right.
it, right? Like they're probably not going to the ones in New Jersey because it's just like another widget in the widget factory.
So their decision making is just
Like
an
purely
Excel
financial.
spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right? It's just green and or black and red, and what's going to give them the most profit for their shareholders.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that's kind of the
Yeah.
I think
And
the
one
difference.
solution a lot of people have proposed in healthcare is just outright bans on what they call the corporate practice of medicine. So essentially saying only doctors can own healthcare facilities. Not that doctors don't also want to make money in many cases, but like doctors do have an oath that they have to
Right.
fulfill, right?
Right.
And that is like a key difference from a firm that is not like the patient care really has nothing to do with it. It's just the business. And there are corporate practice of medicine bans on the books in many states, but man, enforcement is very, very, very rare.
Oh, I want to talk about that in a little bit because
This is
Oregon,
maybe a third soapbox.
Oregon just passed a
Yes.
first of its kind. So let's take
Yeah.
a quick break and we'll come back. All right, we are back with Megan Greenwell. So we just briefly touched on some like legislative type stuff. That I feel like that might be a little bit more uplifting. So let's save that for the end.
Okay.
let's give people some hope a little bit later.
Yeah.
First, one thing that I feel like I'm probably in like the top 50% of, I don't know like a ton about private equity, but I know enough to like be able to have a conversation about it and kind of know what they do. But one thing that surprised me was the different ways that they can extract money and profit, because it's easy to just think, oh, well, this firm is buying this company or they're buying this hospital. So they want the hospital to make money. They want it to succeed. But that's not the case.
No. Not, I mean,
Maybe a little bit. They don't want it to
Yeah.
like outright,
In an
go
ideal-
bankrupt.
right. In an ideal situation, the company makes money, right? Because then you get a profitable exit, and this is a short-term game. But they're at best kind of apathetic to whether the company makes serious money or not, because the private equity firm can make money either way. So the basic payment structure for private equity firms is known as 2 and 20. You get 20% of any profits over a certain threshold. But even if the company doesn't profit, you get 2% of the total deal value. So again, this is likely in the billions of dollars every single year. That is just a management fee. That does not matter. The company could be in the toilet and you would still get that 2%.
Toys R Us was going down the tubes. They were still getting that management fee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're
Yes,
getting
that
it
was a
from Toys R Us? Like, this is another
Yes.
thing that is the company is on the hook for.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes. And then there are all of these other ways to make money off of the portfolio company that actually weaken the portfolio company to strengthen the private equity firms. So the classic one is what they call sale leaseback agreements.
This is the worst. I can't like the fact that this exists. Go ahead, tell.
Yes. And this was a big thing in retail, in Toys R Us and many other retail chains, and then expanded to hospitals.
Yeah.
So what a sale leaseback agreement is essentially in companies that own a lot of real estate or one piece of very valuable real estate, the private equity firm will sell off the real estate that they own, and then the portfolio company has to pay rent on that same land that they once owned. So to use the Toys R Us example, Toys R Us had historically owned almost all of the land underneath its stores. Like even in a strip mall, they owned their little parcel. The private equity firms in charge of Toys R Us sold all of that. And so now they are in the same spaces, literally in the same stores, but have to pay rent on buildings that they didn't have, the mortgage had been cleared years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is this weird thing where then obviously the private equity firms get a percentage of the rent payments because they've worked out these sweetheart deals with real estate investment firms, or in some cases they sell them to themselves because they're also in the real estate business, and then they're just collecting all of it. And then so you do see
It's
that
wild.
spread from retail to hospitals. And the hospital stuff is really wild. So a lot of private equity owned hospitals no longer own their land and their buildings. And there is a company based in Alabama, this is one of my favorite soapboxes, called Medical Properties Trust, where their entire business is partnering with private equity firms to buy up all the land, giving a nice little kickback to the private equity firms, and screwing over the hospitals in the process. And so Medical Properties Trust has done insanely well for themselves, as have all these private equity firms that work for them. And it's like, oh, only the hospitals and the patients lose out.
Follow-up question. Do laws exist?
Not anymore.
Is it like
Not so much.
It's just this makes me think is this just an anarchist society, and we have there's no oversight. There's no this land that's like maybe the most valuable asset,
Yes.
right, to these companies, these hospitals, and so you know what the firm's intention is at that point. It's
Mhm.
that short term.
Right.
They're just it's a
Because
strip.
they're in it just to sell it, so they want to get as much as they can out of it
And
before they
you
sell.
use the analogy of like a strip mining, right? Like
Yes.
that's kind of what this is.
Oh, absolutely. There was this case in Philadelphia. There was an urban safety net hospital right in downtown Philadelphia called Hahnemann Hospital that, was serving a lot of people who had no other options. And when a private equity firm bought it, it was sort of like, huh, why would a private equity firm want like an urban safety net hospital? And it was because that was a great spot for luxury condos. And
Mm,
so they closed the hospital so fast. It became a big thing in a lot of medical circles because they tried to sell off the residency slots. And to the point about like, do laws exist? Everybody
What?
was sort of like, can you do that? I don't think you can do that, but are there any laws saying you can't do that? Because nobody had ever thought of it before,
Yeah.
right?
That's
And that is true of so much of how private equity operates, is just like finding the loopholes. It's not even in most cases like they have to get regulations lifted. It's that
right.
the entire industry was designed to fit through the eye of the needle. Um, and so they've never had any regulatory problems, really.
Well,
Oh my
let's
goodness.
let's talk about like regulation and laws and things. So just recently, I'm sure you're aware of this, right? Oregon passed or signed, the governor signed it. A it seemed like it was a first of its kind thing. Maybe there's other iterations in other states,
It
but
certainly goes the furthest, yeah.
yeah, of basically a corporate practice of medicine law, which prevented private equity from being majority owners
Yes.
in medical practices.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this law?
I mean, it's great. It's such a
Yeah.
good one. There have been similar laws in other states. Massachusetts passed a law at the end of last year increasing scrutiny of private equity deals in healthcare. But this Oregon law is definitely like the most progressive I've seen.
How did it go further than the others?
So it is just stricter on what banning corporate practice of medicine means,
Oh, gotcha.
basically.
Okay.
So the like majority thing is there are a lot of ways to get around it in a lot of other places. And I don't want to say there are no ways to get around it because private equity firms are very good at getting around things. So to some extent, like we do just have to see what happens in Oregon. But
They have a lot of lawyers
a
probably at their
lot of
Yeah.
disposal.
lawyers,
Yes.
yes. But I was pretty pumped to see this news,
Yeah.
also because it is the rare law about private equity in healthcare that didn't come directly out of a absolute catastrophe, right?
Mm.
So Massachusetts passed one last year. Pennsylvania is now considering one. In both of those cases, those came from very well publicized absolute disasters. So Stewart Healthcare, which owned
Oh, yeah.
hospitals in, I think, 9 states, but was based in Massachusetts. When that collapsed, everybody was furious and everybody was like, okay, we have to regulate private equity in healthcare. I don't mean to say that that makes it that's like less good that they did it only because there was a disaster, but they did have to let the disaster happen first.
Right.
And the Oregon one, I mean, obviously there have been bad private equity deals in Oregon like in everywhere, but it wasn't like they got shamed into it in the same way that some places have had to be shamed into it. So
Right.
go
A little more
Oregon.
proactive, I guess.
So
Yeah.
so I was a little bit involved in like, advocacy work for this in just kind of getting the word out, using social media. But the of course there was some back and forth. I'd say a vast majority of physicians of medical practice out there supported this, but there was a lot of people that physicians included that were a bit on the fence about this,
Yeah.
mainly because it exempted hospitals,
Yes.
which I can see that point, right? Because you could argue it can limit competition, and maybe you'll now have more big hospital corporations kind of
Mhm.
come up and consolidate things. I mean, consolidation is always a concern, but I don't know. It seems like a little bit of a wispy argument that that I think we still need to try something,
Yes.
right?
I
That's
think
kind of where I land on it.
I think that's where I've landed on a lot of this stuff. Not that it's going to fix everything. Like, all of these private equity problems are going to require a very multifaceted approach.
Mhm.
So I do not want to say that Oregon's law is a silver bullet, but it's doing something.
Right.
And a
Yeah.
lot of places have just been steadfastly unwilling to do anything.
Right.
So great.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Wait, I have a question. Or maybe it's a couple of questions. Just trying to think about this from all angles. It's a genuine question because I don't know much about any of this really.
Yeah.
Is there ever a case where private equity is good for anyone other than the people kind of at the top making all the money in the private equity firm?
Oh, yeah. No, that's such a good question. So private equity started in the 1960s with what they called bootstrap deals, which were essentially family-run companies that showed the possibility of expansion but didn't have the capital they needed to expand. And so private equity would infuse some money and help the company grow.
Maybe like venture capitalism a little bit.
Yeah, kind of similar.
Okay.
That model still exists in private equity, and you will hear private equity firms love to talk about the situations in which that model works. So KKR, which is one of the big firms I write about in my book, um, they love to talk about this one garage door manufacturer in Illinois where all of the workers got a tiny ownership stake when KKR bought the company. And when KKR sold the company, for a big profit because they had really expanded it, all of these truck drivers were getting, six-figure payouts. So that is great. And if you talk to the private equity industry's main lobbying group, they will say, look, the majority of our deals are in these small family-owned companies. They're not in big chains of hospitals or retail chains or whatever. As far as I can tell, that is absolutely true, but the majority of the deals and the majority of the money and the majority
yeah.
of people affected are very different things. So it's not that private equity never works. It's that they are so focused on these mega deals, right? And these mega deals do not tend to work. 10 times as many companies owned by private equity enter bankruptcy proceedings as companies with other types of ownership, 2% versus 20%. So, yes, it can work in plenty of cases, but I think that does not disprove the idea that the model is fundamentally broken.
Right. And
Yeah.
you would prefer that they work in the biggest cases, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Because that is going to have an outsized effect on
Yeah.
workers,
Right. If you're
on
a
the public.
mom and pop shop and, retail, that's less of a if that goes down, that doesn't affect nearly as many people in nearly as bad of a way as if a hospital that serves an entire community and employs hundreds of people goes down.
Yes, the garage door manufacturer giving payouts to a couple hundred factory workers and truck drivers is lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also laying off 33,000 Toys R Us workers without the severance that their contracts promised them is
Right.
more bad than the other thing is good.
Right. Yeah.
So I frequently, as someone in a specialty, ophthalmology, there's a heavy influx of private equity in our specialty.
Yes.
Dermatology, radiology, a lot of the higher paying field, higher reimbursing fields
Yes.
that are procedure based, equipment based, have surgery centers. That's a big one.
Yep.
Outpatient based specialties are a big target.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard all the arguments for doing this, for
Mhm.
private equity sales, and it's interesting to me that it's always these types of sales of private practices to private equity.
Mm-hmm.
They always benefit the same people, right? Obviously, it's going to be a few people at the top of the company
Mm-hmm.
that are shareholders in this practice.
Mm-hmm.
And those are always the ones that are coming to me in my comments and telling me, actually, you know what? Look at all the benefits that we've had. It helps us negotiate rates with insurance companies. We're able to expand faster, which, all those things might be true.
For now.
But then you talk to the younger associates, the people that just joined the practice, you talk to the employees, and they're in my comments as well. And it's culture.
Yeah.
It's like the culture just changes. So they're and I feel like they try these firms, and the people that monetarily benefit from the sale, the older physicians, and
it's not the age, it's that they're closer to retirement.
Yes.
So if it's a short-term game for the company, that works for them just
perfect.
fine.
Yeah. They sugarcoat this whole process.
Yes.
And so they might still be able to see patients and everything, but I think we overlook the effect that this type of sale has on the culture of the workplace.
Yeah.
Which obviously is going to affect patient care if people are unhappy at work.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think it is very hard to dispute the premise that if you are a worker at any kind of company that is taken over by private equity, your life will get worse. So it does end up feeling in a lot of these cases of doctors like there is this generational divide between somebody who's like, look, I'm just trying to retire and this is like a nice off ramp, and somebody who's like, yeah, but I have 30 years more of working to do,
Right.
and I can't do it in these conditions, right? And I was on another doctor's podcast that asked me, like, okay, so what would you say to somebody who's a doctor who's trying to retire and who's thinking of selling to private equity? And I was like, I don't know, because
I
like
know,
I'm
it's
not
hard.
going to tell somebody you can't pad out your retirement.
How do you just turn down $10 million? Like,
Right?
who among us?
Yeah.
Right? So I get that. Yeah.
No, I get it. I mean, I think it's a terrible position to be in. I guess what I would say is, while not telling somebody not to do it, you should think seriously about how you feel about the effects of that. So
Right.
you do unfortunately have to do the cost benefit analysis between the $10 million for you on one hand, but screwing over all those younger doctors in your practice and probably your patients on the other.
Right. And then your practice closing in, 5 to 7 years or getting sold again. And,
Right. And if you're out, like, that's to some extent no skin off of your nose. But do you feel a responsibility for the legacy of your practice to the younger folks you've mentored, to your patients, etc.? I mean, it is a tough position to be in. A friend told me recently that her doctor had implemented like a $2,000 a year concierge fee because she felt like her two options were that or selling to private equity. And she determined that this was the more ethical option. And like, I don't feel qualified to weigh in on like the ethics of anybody's individual choices, but I can tell people with some level of authority, like, here are the ethical considerations you have to weigh.
Yeah. So there's the financial piece of it, which is easy to see and measure and put in a spreadsheet, but then there's also social costs, there's emotional costs, there's moral costs. So those don't fit into a spreadsheet.
I have a counter for the people that say, like, what other option do I have? But let's take a break and we'll come back. All right. So talking about the kind of the reasons why physicians might sell to private equity, and I've kind of gone back and forth on this with people a lot. At first I was very militant, like, no, you're bad. You're just a Scrooge McDuck swimming in a vault full of coins as a physician who sells to private equity. Bad doctor. But I've kind of softened a little bit because of what we're talking about, right? Like, someone hands you a $10 million check, like, come on, like, We're physicians. We're not private equity firms ourselves. We've never seen that kind of money come through. But here's a counter argument for that thinking, like, okay, what other option? Either if I don't sell to private equity, like, who's going to take over my practice? Am I just going to end up selling to the hospital? And then is that any better? Maybe the hospital is owned by private equity. Maybe, who knows? Maybe it's a big hospital, HCA or something. But I think and what I've learned being in a physician-owned practice is that you have so much of a recruiting advantage because all these residents that are graduating, all these fellows, one of the first questions that's on the top of their mind is, are you thinking about selling to private equity?
That's super interesting.
They don't want to be involved because they've heard so many terrible things of being sold out from underneath them and then having to work as an associate without getting the benefits of the sale. And that's a nightmare scenario for a brand new associate who just joined a practice. And so, and I'm putting this in the context of Oregon and the law that we just passed, in that I think that this is going to be a boon for all the independent practices who can bring in applicants and say, hey, look, there's no risk of private equity here. Like, it's not going to happen. They can't be majority owners. So I think people overlook the fact that you have a recruiting advantage whenever you are not owned by private equity.
Yeah, that's super interesting to me. I didn't really know that about residents and fellows, though it makes sense to me that, like, they're just more aware. Private equity in healthcare is still relatively new. Like, it really only exploded in the 2010s. So the generation that's coming out of residency now is really kind of the first one that, like, has been through the whole training process, understanding that this is such a powerful force. And so I think that's, like, a really powerful thing, and I do think that's worth people keeping in mind. The healthcare section in my book, like we talked about, is about a rural hospital where obviously recruiting is a huge challenge in the best of circumstances. And if you're adding the challenge of recruiting rurally to the challenge of recruiting to private equity, it's like, okay, like, you might not actually be able to hire anybody ever again.
True.
Right. Yeah.
True. I think, and this is in the healthcare part of the book with the hospital in Wyoming, is a big takeaway for me is that it doesn't do any good to throw up your hands and be like, oh, there's nothing we can do about this.
Right.
Like, there's private equity is here to stay, and that they're going to just get more and more powerful. Trying to think outside the box. This goes to the abundance mentality that you talked about. Versus the private equity version, which is the scarcity mentality. Thinking of an abundance mentality and just thinking outside the box, like the community in Wyoming that basically crowdfunded a new hospital for the most part because they didn't want to have to live using the private equity owned hospital.
Yeah, they were fighting against management of their hospital for so many years, and then finally they said, we're never going to win this fight, so what else can we do?
Yeah.
And I think when people heard that, like, a kind of ragtag group of locals in rural Wyoming wanted to raise enough money to build a hospital from scratch, everybody was sort of like, that's cute. That is so sweet.
Good luck.
Like, that's never going to happen.
Like a kid with a lemonade stand.
Yes, exactly. And what happened is they raised over $60 million and they have broken ground on a new hospital.
Amazing.
It is just like
incredible.
Such an argument in favor of, like, the audacious, bold thinking. And that can look different place to place, right? It doesn't have to be the same solution everywhere. Maybe you can't build a new hospital from scratch in a lot of places, but it is a real argument for you have to be thinking in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it wasn't just healthcare. You also talk about other, stories from other industries in your book, and the housing industry comes to mind where the tenants, basically banded together to fight against the private equity powers that be that were not maintaining their housing. So I think that was a theme that I took away was, short of legislation, which is kind of a top-down approach, there's also the bottom-up approach, which sometimes is actually more powerful and more effective.
Yeah.
If in the healthcare example, for maybe if doctors and nurses and everybody kind of bands together against this thing, you have stories in here that prove that it is possible, and it
like a union.
Ooh, radical. No, I do think there is a tendency for people to forget their own power, right? And there are just more of us than there are of them, where them is private equity firms and their partners. And, in the housing example, my protagonist for that section of the book is just like one of the most impressive and competent people I've ever met in my life. She's just incredible. And she was not a person who on paper had a lot of power, right? She had worked a bunch of retail kind of customer servicey type jobs. She was relatively low income. She had just gotten out of public housing to move to this apartment complex that was owned by private equity. And so I think a lot of us would have looked at her and said she doesn't have any power. But she looked around this housing complex, huge complex, 2,300 apartments. And many of the residents there are very recent African immigrants and refugees. She is not an African immigrant, but her parents are. And so she was looking at her neighbors, many of whom don't speak fluent English, precarious immigration situations, maybe precarious job situations. And she was looking around and saying, well, I have a lot more power than any of them. So I have an obligation here to stand up for them. And that was really genuinely kind of exciting to me, that a person who, by most standards didn't have that much power was saying, well, I'm the most powerful one in the situation, so I'm going to do what I have to do to stand up for these other folks. I didn't want to. I'm really allergic to the kind of narrative nonfiction book that ends with a list of prescriptions of here's how we fix this problem. But nor did I feel like I could write a private equity book that was just everything's really bad. Okay, bye.
Yeah.
And so the way I figured out
that's the Glauc and Flecken approach, by the way.
I mean, listen, as a cynic, I respect that approach very much. But it felt like if I was convincing people to spend $30 on this book, I was going to have to give them a little more.
It's true.
And all four of my protagonists, I followed each of these four people for 2 years. And all four of them were doing something about it. And that in some cases is pushing for regulation. In some cases is reinventing their business model from the ground up. In some cases is just fighting a firm in the classic sense. But they were all doing something. And I hope that readers come away from the book feeling a little bit inspired, feeling yes, we do have some power here, but we have to A, work together, and B, work locally. The way to combat a private equity firm that has never set foot in your community is to come up with solutions that could only be created in your community by people who really know that place. And in different ways, all four of the protagonists in my book have done that with some really, maybe not world-shaking results, but
community-shaking results.
Yeah,
totally.
Sure. Yeah.
I love it. It's just I'm excited. It just makes me want to go and just punch private equity in the face. I'm ready. I'm ready. Well, I think I feel uplifted at this point. So maybe we'll stop there.
It's a good place to end.
This is a good place
See,
to end.
we brought it all the way back around to hopefulness.
That's right.
Megan, thank you so. Megan Greenwell, Bad Company, Private Equity, and the Death of the American Dream. I just had such a blast reading this, and I found myself whenever I read about them getting the funding to build the hospital, I just about cheered in a room by myself. It's that kind of feeling. It was really, really uplifting and really cool to see. And it is hopeful. It just inspires hope that we can make, the individual can make a difference. And
yeah. And sometimes we can fight more for other people than we can for ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
So thinking of the protagonist in the housing section and her neighbors, and in healthcare, fighting for your patients. You know, if you don't want to do it for yourself, do it for them.
Yeah.
So check out the book. And you're on a tour right now. You're going around all over the place doing readings and things. So,
I am, yeah.
so
and
we
I'm looking to book more of them. So if anybody wants to bring me to wherever they live, let me know.
Have you considered doing readings in hospitals?
Somebody suggested I should hold events in like old Toys R Us buildings.
Yeah.
Which would be so fun. If anybody wants to like break into a decommissioned hospital with me, I'm down.
That's great. You're also on social media. You spend most of your time on Blue Sky these days, right? So Greenwell, and just search your name. I'm sure other people will find you.
Yeah,
so.
Greenwell on Blue Sky, Emmy Greenwell on Instagram, which I'm also very active on.
Gotcha.
Not really active on Twitter anymore.
Yeah, me neither, even though that's where I first messaged you, because that's where I saw your
I know, I'm glad I saw
it. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Fascinating stories about private equity.
Yeah.
I love just the human touch that she put on all of this.
Because it is kind of intentionally a boring and obscure industry.
Private equity,
Yeah, exactly. Who's gonna read about that? But people love reading about other people's stories. So to use that as the mechanism to educate people about it is genius.
Oh yeah, I loved it. Definitely check it out. Again, Bad Company, Private Equity, and the Death of the American Dream. If you guys have any like private equity related stories,
we
can do it anonymously too.
Mm-hmm.
So because I know that like private equity doesn't like people tattling on them,
right?
And so, but we would love to share your experience working in a private equity hospital practice. Former Toys R Us, whatever, because private equity is everywhere. So, and the themes are similar with how they treat the workers. And the culture.
It's a business model. So.
Right. So let us know. You can email us knockknockhigh@human-content.com. Send us a message on any of the social media apps. You can also hang out with us in our Human Content Podcast family over on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. Check out all the podcasts we got going on. Thanks to all the great listeners leaving feedback and reviews. If you subscribe and comment on your favorite podcasting app or on YouTube at Glaucomfleckens, by the way, two Glaucomfleckens,
There is no
singular,
2 in the handle.
No, it's
it's plural. Plural is the word you're looking for.
Oh, that's the word. Glaucomfleckens. We can give you a shout out. At New Friends on YouTube said, I'm behind on episodes, but I wanted to thank Kristen for sharing her ARFID journey and her thoughts. My oldest child has ARFID and it is so incredibly difficult. He often doesn't have any safe foods because he burns out on them by eating them over and over. Right now we supplement with tube feedings to help with calories, hydration, and nutrients. Gosh, challenging.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, look, your story's getting out there.
Yeah, I'm glad it can be helpful to people.
That's like a kind of a new thing. So
it is, and it was.
People are learning.
Yep. There we go.
Not just picky eating.
It's not. It's a different thing.
So thank you at New Friends for your message. It goes on to say he's been in OT, therapy, lots of different things. It's very enlightening and good to hear from an adult with some of the associated fears and feelings that are like a 12-year-old.
Yeah, I've heard that actually from a couple of people that, and I get it, kids aren't really able to articulate things so much other than just, I don't want it, I don't like it. And so, to have somebody who can kind of analyze things and talk about why all of this, what's going on and why, I've heard that that's helpful.
We'll keep everyone updated on Kristen's ARFID journey. Full video episodes are up every week on that YouTube channel at Glaucomfleckens. Also have a Patreon, lots of cool perks, bonus episodes, react to medical shows and movies, hang out with other people in the Knock Knock High community. We're there, active in it, early ad-free episode access, interactive Q&A live stream events, much more. Patreon.com/Glaucomfleckens. Speaking of Patreon community perks, should we shout out the Jonathans?
Yes, let's do.
Well, we always love a Jonathan shout out.
Good
Patrick
head nod
Lucia
to them
C. Patrick Lucia C. Edward K. Marion W. Mr. Granddaddy, Caitlin C. Brianna L. Mary H. Keith G. Parker Muhammad L. David H. Kaylee A. Gabe, Gary M, Eric B, Marlene S, Scott M, Kelsey M, Dr. Hoover, Sean M, Hawkeye MD, Bubbly Salt, and Shanity. Patreon roulette time. Random shout out to someone on the emergency medicine tier. Shout out to Catherine P for being a patron. Thank you for listening. We are your hosts, Will and Kristen Planner. Also known as the Glauc and Pleckins. Our executive producers are Will Fender, Kristen Planner, Aaron Courtney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brick. Editor and engineer Jason Portizo. Our music is by Omer Benzvi. To learn about Knock Knock Hi's program, disclosure, ethics, policy, submission, verification, and licensing terms, and HIPAA release terms, go to glaucandpleckins.com or reach out to us at knockknockhigh@human-content.com with questions, concerns, or medical puns. Only fun medical puns, though, not bad medical puns. Well, I guess the definition of bad. Anyway, Knock Knock High is a human content production.
Knock, knock. Goodbye.
Thanks for watching the episode. You can find more on that playlist over there. If you prefer to listen, or you just had your eyes dilated, you can binge full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Or join the party over on Patreon, where you get early access episodes, hang out with us, get lots of exclusive bonus content. Help you subscribe, leave a comment below. Let us know what you think.